Greetings, loyal viewers, and welcome back to another review. And here we're going to be talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. And as a whole, it's a lot of fun, to be honest. I mean, it's got a few minor problems here and there, but after the abundance of either at best mediocre or at worst downright terrible Ninja Turtles games we've gotten over the past several years, including Mutants in Manhattan, God bless Platinum Games. They went through quite the unfortunate phase at that time, the more I think about it. This felt like a real breath of fresh air. Anyways, in this quick little review, I'm going to be going through the basic bullet points of the game's many strengths, as well as a few of the minor criticisms I have here and there that, don't get me wrong, they don't deter from my overall enjoyment of the game. Hardly, I would even say, but they are worth mentioning, and I do hope they get addressed in a future patch or something like that. So, let's go ahead and kick off this review by talking about the presentation. Not a whole lot that I can really say about this in particular, except for the fact that, yeah, the team did a really good job of capturing and maintaining the classic look of the 16-bit era Turtles games, most notably Turtles in Time, which isn't too surprising considering the fact that the developers clearly took a lot of notable inspiration from that game. But more importantly though, while they did indeed do a solid job of maintaining that classic 16-bit look like I mentioned before, I feel they did an even better job at modernizing it in all the right ways, most notably with the character animations and environmental detail. Not only are the animations in particular much more lively, but the movesets do a pretty damn good job of correctly capturing the personalities and fighting styles of each individual character. And I'll talk more about those also when we get to gameplay, at least a little bit. As for the environments themselves, much like with the character animations, a lot of them just ooze personality. From the streets and subways of New York City, to the Central Park Zoo, to scaling the top of the rooftop, finally going through Dimension X, this game's environments are all great to look at and go through, backed even further by having unique enemy types in some of them. But enough of talking about the presentation, which is still great, let's now talk about the music. This one will be pretty brief as well, as while the music is definitely really good, there's really not that much I can say about it beyond how well they managed to add even more personality to the aforementioned levels. Probably my personal favorite one though is the theme for the overworld map. I find myself just taking a moment or two while I'm playing the game just to tap my feet to it. Just listen. They also incorporate tracks with lyrics to them on a few occasions, including the second hoverbike level, which does sound really nice. Once again, this is some really solid stuff, which in this case isn't too surprising since the composer also worked on games such as Streets of Rage 4 and Sonic Mania. But now, let us finally go over gameplay. To keep this bit as short, sweet, and to the point as possible without dragging this video on for too long, much like with the presentation itself, the gameplay I feel does a really good job of maintaining the feel of Turtles in Time while also modernizing it in a few, albeit very appropriate areas. For one thing, you'll notice very quickly that the fighting feels a bit more fast-paced and aggressive compared to Turtles in Time, which I feel works beautifully, especially with a more modern 2D beat-em-up. Things like the rolling, for instance, I feel not only keeps the action fast-paced, but if timed correctly, and as long as you know that you can only do so left or right, you can dodge a good number of enemy attacks as well as incoming obstacles in some levels, which feels immensely satisfying to pull off, especially if you want to keep your combo up. Another welcomed aspect, which honestly in this game's case isn't surprising since many of the people who worked on this also worked on Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, is the level up system, which, even though the max for each character is unfortunately only level 10, still offers great rewards from completing level challenges and completing a set of collectibles, from an increased health bar to new abilities to an increased number of times that the special meter itself can be filled up. Another thing I really like is that the taunting mechanic actually does serve a purpose beyond just, trolling the enemies. If you time it right, you can immediately fill up a meter gauge so that you can perform more special attacks. Be careful though not to get too greedy with this, as the taunting animations are about 2 seconds long, and because of that, naturally, if you use it at the wrong time, you can get hit and the meter won't fill up. Basically, it's a pretty good risk and reward system, particularly when fighting bosses, as, well, the thing with this is that you can basically do this anytime, even between enemy encounters. In that regard, especially if you want to keep your combo up, I would definitely recommend doing the taunt mechanic between enemy encounters. As for the boss fights themselves at the very end of each level, they're pretty alright. At times they're a little too easy, I feel, but are a decent enough way to end each individual level, especially the final boss against Super Shredder, which I'm pretty sure is the only boss in the entire game, at least on my first playthrough, in which I lost a life to because of how somewhat tricky it can be to dodge some of his attacks. Now, before we continue, I also want to quickly mention the weird irony of the subtitle for this game, as prior to Super Shredder at the very end, Shredder himself barely appears throughout the entire story. Much like with the criticisms I'm about to address here in a minute, it's not a major issue, mind you, especially since story is oftentimes secondary in a 2D beat-em-up. I just like a little more consistency in that regard is all. Now, before we wrap things up with my criticisms, let us quickly go over multiplayer. So yeah, needless to say, this game can be even more fun with playing with others, especially friends. And the fact that there's local co-op is even better, especially since you can play with up to 5 other players for a total of 6. And best of all, from my personal experience so far at least, it still runs smoothly, even with that many people playing right along with me. All the fighting and absolute chaos that can unfold when you have that many players on screen is certainly the sight to behold. There's also another little risk and reward system in the multiplayer in the form of high-fiving your teammate, which will mostly fill up their special attack meter in exchange for a bit of your health. All in all, multiplayer is definitely a lot of fun, but it does unfortunately lead me to one of my very few criticisms. I mentioned before just how utterly chaotic the multiplayer can get at times, and don't get me wrong, it's great fun, but the only problem I had, at least when I was playing through it, is that oftentimes in the midst of the chaos, I would get lost as to where I am, and oftentimes that would just result in me either getting hit, or me just hitting absolutely nothing. And honestly, I feel like an easy solution to this would have been adding in an arrow pointing to where you are at all times. That I honestly feel would solve this issue no problem. Another minor criticism I have, especially when it comes to the later levels, is that while the game definitely does give you a fair warning when obstacles like vehicles or bottomless pits are incoming, especially in like the hoverboard levels, it doesn't do that, however, when ramming enemies such as the spear-wielding Foot Clan ninjas are about to come in and potentially ruin your combo. Again, I feel like adding the same kind of warnings on the side of the screen for something like this would help a lot more here. But at the end of the day, those are very minor compared to the grand scheme of things. All in all, this is definitely the Ninja Turtles game that we've not only wanted for a really long time, but in a lot of ways, especially given the Ninja Turtles games we've gotten since then, we absolutely needed. For all those reasons and more, if I ever needed more, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge gets 9 Michelangelos out of 10. Games like this come around every now and then to remind us that sometimes we don't always need something completely brand new necessarily, just something familiar and retro, albeit in this case polished to a near perfection. With everything great about this game, this I feel will go down as a really good textbook example of how to do a nostalgic callback to a beloved classic while still being its own unique thing for the most part, while still being very familiar. If you're like me and you have Xbox Game Pass but haven't played this game yet, do yourself a favor and give it a go. it's definitely one shell of a good time. And until next time, I'm King Gargantuous, and take care.